Saving money is one of the surest ways to build wealth in the long run. However, in recent years, there's been several struggles on the side of individuals and multinational corporations when it comes to savings. And so in this video, I'll be breaking down the 5 key mistakes that people tend to make when saving, and then how to, more importantly, avoid them and then work towards the pursuit of whatever savings goal or whatever financial goals you have in the near future. And this brings us to the first point, which is saving in a high yield interest account. So when we think about savings, we tend to consider that, saving alone or putting money aside in a traditional bank is the surest way for us to build wealth. However, there is an economic concept known as inflation. And inflation is the rate at which prices of goods and services in an economy rise over time. So holding all other factors constant, the prices of the milk, the food, the groceries that we tend to purchase in the economy would go up. And that is why you need to put money in a high yield savings account, or a savings account that brings more returns to offset the impact or the damage caused by the rise in the prices of goods and services in the economy, otherwise known as inflation. So what you want to do is that saving or putting money into a traditional bank would not necessarily make you rich, or it wouldn't make you better off financially. What you need to do is that you need to put money instead in a high yield savings account. On average, high yield savings accounts return 10 times better than what we actually tend to gain from putting money in a traditional bank. So for example, in the UK, the average returns on your savings is around about 2.45%, and then 0.41% in the US. And that simply means that adjusting for inflation or the prices at which goods and services go up, any £10,000 that you put in a UK bank, you're actually losing £150 at the end of the year. In the US, you're actually losing $200 for every $10,000 that you put in a US bank. So what you want to do is that you want to put money instead in a high yield savings account that would return anywhere between 4.5 and then 4.6%, and that would offset the impact of inflation. So putting money down without the money actually working to realize any interest would make your money less valuable in the near future. And that is why you want to invest or to put your money in a high yield savings account. This brings us to the second general mistake that people tend to make when saving. They tend to think that buying items in bulk necessarily would make you to save more. But trust me when I tell you that most shops actually increase the unit prices of goods that they sell in bulk. So anytime that you go out there to buy goods in bulk, which is a good idea and a way to save money, you need to consider the unit prices of these goods and to compare them to see whether or not the unit prices of these goods, actually buying them in isolation or buying them in single units, are actually way lesser than buying them in bulk. Most shops are likely to increase the prices a little bit in order for you to just buy into the psychological effect of, oh, I'm buying in bulk and so I'm saving money. What you have to do is that you also need to consider the perishability of the goods that you're buying. Buying groceries in bulk would actually lead to one thing: waste of money and waste of food. So buy items like toiletries in bulk, because that actually has a very low perishability, and so you're likely to get several benefits down the line buying them in bulk. But then again, you need to sit down and then consider whether buying these things in single units are actually way better off or less better off than buying them in bulk. If you're able to do this, then you're sure to know that you're buying at a discount or buying at a premium, which also helps you and contributes towards the attainment of your savings goals. This brings us to the third point, which is skipping minor maintenance in order to save money. And this is one of the biggest ways for you to lose money, because I have actually been a victim. So a couple of years ago, I drove a VW to run, and then at some point, the vehicle was just jerking as I stepped on the accelerator. And then subsequently, the problem tended to be that the spark plugs in the engine actually had a problem. So I had to replace all the spark plugs. But what I did instead was, instead of me to buy new spark plugs, I went out to get slightly used spark plugs. For a couple of weeks, the vehicle drove perfectly well. But then afterwards, the problem returned, and it was much of a headache, as opposed to even the first instance that I actually had the point or the chance to actually replace all the spark plugs with new ones. And so that is what we tend to do. Anytime that there is a maintenance to actually embark on, or a little expenditure to be made to service our vehicles, to maintain the home or anything, we tend to think about saving money on those things. But that £10 or that £50 that you're actually saving today would actually cost you more than times 10 in the near future if you don't actually solve the problem now by spending on it instantly. If you're to save on those minor maintenance, you're likely to spend 10 times or even more when the damage actually gets worse off in the near future, like I experienced with the VW2 that I was talking about earlier. This brings us to the fourth point, which is going in always for the cheapest option. So one of the greatest advice that you're likely to receive when it comes to cutting down cost or saving is that you should always go in for the alternative, which is relatively cheaper than what you want to actually purchase. But what you need to consider is the price as opposed to the value that that item is actually delivering to you or whatever use that it is going to serve. Over the years, what I actually did was I always sought to choose alternatives in a bid to cut down costs and to save more. For example, when I started this YouTube channel, I had the option of getting the Softbox, and I didn't go in for the costliest Softbox, the one that I'm using now, which is costing me about £200. Instead, I went in for a cheaper option that cost me about $20. And over the long run, I realized that it wasn't giving me the same quality that I wanted to see in the videos. And that was a very difficult position for me to be in. So eventually, I had to just stop using that old Softbox and then get this one, which meant that I spent twice as much, knowing very well that if I had gone in for the one that was more costlier, it would have served the value and the purpose, as opposed to cutting down cost and going for the one that was £20 and then eventually not serving the purpose. The same thing happened also with this microphone that I have right here. I went in for a cheaper microphone, but I realized that the sound quality was not what I really wanted to see or wanted to hear in my videos. So I ended up spending £100 more also on a new microphone altogether. And those two things are not being in use. They're just laying around the house doing absolutely nothing. So I've lost money in a bid to save money. So what you want to know is that, and what you want to do in the long run, is to always go for the option that is likely to return the greatest value. And that might actually also mean that you may also go on to spend slightly more than your budget in order to get that value delivered. This brings us to the last point, which is, as opposed to savings, try as much as possible and then service any debts that you hold. So for example, if you have any credit card debt, what you might want to do is to service that debt as opposed to putting money aside towards savings, because that debt would actually be accruing interest over the long run, and those interests will be eaten into your savings or your ability to actually achieve your financial goals at the end of the year. So as opposed to saving, try as much as possible and then service and offset that debt, because that would actually position you to achieve several other greater heights in terms of your financial goals, as opposed to just putting money aside, because the returns on any savings would actually be less compared to the interest that you'll be paying with a credit card debt. The average APR interest on a normal credit card debt is hovering around 21% on average. And so what you want to do is that instead of saving money, you might try as much as possible and offset that debt, which would eventually liberate you financially and then help you to work towards the pursuit and the subsequent attainment of your savings goal. And so this is it. If you've got value from this video, then I humbly plead with you to like and then subscribe to the channel, because we'll be breaking down several other concepts on a weekly basis on this channel. Thank you for spending time with us, and see you in the next video.